what people need, what people want, what people desire is to feel seen, heard, and recognized. And I know that I can create a space for people to feel that way. What I can't do is, snap my fingers and change systems or policies. But what I can do is I can be present and I can give my full attention to the person that I'm with, and I can help them feel seen, heard, and recognized.
Welcome to Oxygen for Educators, part of the Ripple Maker Project. I'm one of your hosts, Michelle Kinder, and you'll meet Chris Kent Phelps in just a bit. It's our hope to bring you thought-provoking, unscripted conversations full of actionable ideas to fuel your important work in the world. Thanks for tuning in. This space is for you. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Michelle. How are you today?
I'm good today.
I know you're good today.
We
get to meet. Yeah, because I just watched you talking to a baby on the podcast.
I got some oxytocin hanging out with Harley, Katie's baby. So yummy.
It's a good way to start the day.
It's a really good way to start the day. Your baby is 15 now?
15. Mm-hmm.
And my baby's 18. So getting to hang out with Harley is so yummy.
Agreed.
And Ellie. Katie's babies, for the listeners, are younger. So we all live vicariously through each other, related to different ages and stages.
Which is fun.
Very fun. I am delighted that people get to meet Laura today because I'm obsessed with her as a human. Her capacity to be so open-hearted and brilliant just enthrall me. So tell everyone a little bit about Laura.
Let me do that. Dr. Laura Lata is a lifelong learner who started out as a teacher. And what I loved her comment that she immediately recognized how hard the work was and set out to figure how to make this all-consuming work less hard for teachers and better for students. And it seems she's found a solution in the consortium model. She is currently the executive director of the Tulsa Higher Education Consortium, which is a collaboration of 9 colleges and universities in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I have dubbed her in my brain the queen of collaboration. And I learned a lot about that from her today. So I think listeners will enjoy hearing her thoughts on collaboration and community.
Oh my gosh, we're going to keep the queen of collaboration alive with her. I love that. Okay, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Is consortium, is that one of those words you can say both ways?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, which is more posh, consortium? Are you being all posh today?
No, I think it can go either way.
Okay, I love it. So onward and forward to hear about the consortium.
Let's do it.
Hi, Laura. Welcome.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm so excited about this time together because I'm a fan of yours and your work, and I can't wait for other people to hear what you're up to.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. And likewise, I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, and the Oxygen for Educators podcast has been one of my favorite podcasts, and I was so honored that you asked me to join.
I love that. It makes me so happy that it has served you in any way, shape, or form, because you're a good example of who we think about when we're like, how do we fuel people moving mountains in the education space? And that would be you.
Aw, well, thank you.
So tell us about your story, and in particular, how you became so passionate about educators and students and education in general. What do we need to know about you?
Sure. Well, growing up, I always loved school, and my teachers really served as such icons for me. I just have such fond memories of the incredible teachers that I had, and really inspired me to pursue education myself when it was time to go to college. So I got my undergrad in education, and I started my career as a fourth grade teacher. And it was wonderful and incredible, and hard and very
Yeah.
challenging.
Yeah.
And I realized very quickly that this all-consuming work was very complex, and I was curious about how to make an impact on it, to make it
Mm.
less hard,
Mm.
um, and to make it better for students. And the thing about education is when you start to dive in, and you learn more and more, you realize how much you don't know and how much more there is to
Mm.
learn and know. And so I decided to move in the administration path, and I got my master's in administration and became an assistant principal for 1 year. I'm convinced nobody will be able to convince me otherwise that job is all-consuming work.
Mm.
Um, and I was relatively young in my career, and I wanted to start a family, and I felt pretty confident that for me, I couldn't have that job and start a family of my own.
Mm.
So in my situation, I decided to become a community school coordinator. And I was still, part of the administrative team. But while I was doing that, I was overseeing all of the community partnerships that we had with the school, after school programs. And I just kept going to school, and I just wanted to learn more about this system. And I wanted to experience it from every vantage point possible, as a teacher, as a parent, as um, you know, a researcher. So I got my doctorate while I was a community school coordinator, and I love teaching. And so I started teaching at the college level, and that was my entry into higher ed. I've taught in higher ed for about 9 years, and I've taught undergraduate and graduate students. I think I probably always hope to do that. I enjoy it so much. But that sort of served as a connection point into the role that I fill now as the executive director of the Tulsa Higher Education Consortium. And I work with 9 colleges and universities, and I also community organizations, so business, civic, and philanthropic groups, to support students on their journeys to higher education. And in that role, I do a lot of facilitation and teaching and convening and connecting. And now I'm, 15 years into my career, and I still have so much to learn about this very complex system.
But it is so interesting how many vantage points you've had, and that you have kind of that strong internal driver to get like as much aperture as possible in terms of the biggest picture. I can see that knowing you. I can see that drive, and I can see how that informs your work. But what would you say about how that internal drive to get the widest lens possible on the education system and all your different seats on all your different buses, how does that inform your work today?
Yeah, well, I think of it as more like, I guess I've had the position of being on the dance floor and the balcony. So when I was a teacher, I was on the dance floor and I was doing the work. I was very much into planning lessons and building curriculum. And I've had an opportunity to kind of move up to the balcony to see a more, I guess, bird's eye view of the system, and to think critically about, how is this system serving teachers? How is this system serving students and families? And now, as a mom of children in the system myself, it has really, I guess, formed my perspective on systems change and what that looks like, and that we may have great ideas about how it should change, but recognizing that there are so many different layers and levels that need to be considered, and people at every one of those layers and levels is really critical.
Mm, mm. I feel like the complexity of systems level change puts 90% of us in the fetal position and fuels 10%, made up numbers. But why does it fuel you? And what levers do you see that are like continually attracting your attention as like truly having a shot at creating this systemic improvement?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I think that people who are going to make meaningful systems change have to be able to toggle between the balcony and the dance floor and recognize that it's relationships and it's empathy and understanding with teachers, with parents, with everybody at multiple levels in the system, that's going to make the biggest difference and the biggest shift as far as systemic change goes. But you're right, it is overwhelming. And I think thinking about systems change work, it's a long game. It's not something that can happen overnight. There's not a silver bullet to changing anything. It's engaging people, connecting with people, and bringing people along in movements that take time and are dedicated to students and their growth.
That makes sense to me. And it makes me think about your communities of practice. Can you tell people about that and what they exist to do and what you've noticed about their power?
Yeah. So the consortium serves as a convener, a connector, and a communicator, the 3 C's. But the space that we really occupy that makes such a difference in higher ed and at the systems level is through these things that we call communities of practice. We recognize with 9 colleges and universities in our membership that there are many single person shops or offices at each institution that maybe doesn't have a peer, doesn't have a colleague to have a sort of a brain dump or a brainstorm with. And so creating spaces for conversation about new ideas, about challenges, about pain points, bringing everyone to the table across 9 institutions to engage in that type of thought work and also empathy is really powerful. And we have seen over the last 4 years that slowly but surely there has been change happening at multiple levels in the education system, whether it's tweaking a policy that is really inconvenient for students or making information easier for students to access. We've found that these communities are really the driver for that collaborative work and energy, and really create some momentum to help fuel that change.
Can you give us an example of one just so people can really wrap their heads around what that looks like? It makes so much sense to me what you're saying and how it works. I just want to put even more definition around it.
Yeah. So we have 10 communities of practice. One of them that I really enjoy. I enjoy attending all of them. They're all wonderful, but they're all very unique.
You can't have a favorite child. What?
No. We have a student well-being community of practice. And this is a group of folks that have identified that their role is somewhere in the realm of that impacts the student experience. So it could be mental health professionals on campus. Often, and especially with our smaller colleges, there's only one person in that role. Or maybe it's somebody that's overseeing a medical clinic, or maybe it's a community partner who doesn't know how to connect with higher ed, and we've invited them into the space to share their expertise and their knowledge in a way that maybe they wouldn't have had that opportunity outside of this unique space. But that group is tremendous because have just really developed such a beautiful, empathetic culture and a vulnerability that has led to some really, really cool things. Do you want me to tell you about?
I would love it.
So that group recognized that, and it was such an interesting moment when they sort of had this honest conversation about the reality that they maybe weren't serving students who had received special education services in K-12. So they'd had an IEP, an individualized education plan, or a 504 plan. And they were seeing that students that came to college felt really out of touch with resources and accommodations at the college level. And they invited K-12 partners to the space. It was really their idea to bring them into the space to figure out, what do accommodations look like in K-12, and what are the resources available in higher ed, and how can we bridge that gap so that students, when they graduate from high school and maybe they have a 504 plan or an IEP, which doesn't carry over into college exactly like that, but what would it look like to create a more seamless transition for them so that they have those accommodations, those modifications and resources, and they also have a person that they can reach out to, and that is their point person. So the group together developed this accessibility resource for students, and it has, first of all, I think really powerful, all of the contact information for a human person, not just a call line or a info email address, but somebody that they can reach out to at a university and have a conversation about the types of accommodations that they need. And then also some just general things that they can keep in mind as they advocate for themselves and the things that they need as they're learning on campus. And so I think it's just such a beautiful illustration of how, when we come together, initially when we get a group together, it's, a little awkward. You're like introducing yourselves and things, but pretty shortly after that, when you have the shared experience and you need that space for empathy, vulnerability is able to kind of, surface. And that's when you can get innovative and you can think about, how can we make a difference and solve a problem together, rather than, spin our wheels in isolation or think about how great it would be if we could ... But together, you really have that capacity, that energy, and that motivation to do something.
Ooh, it feels like such a counterforce from the "this is the way we've always done it" energy.
Yeah, it is. And I think in a lot of ways, higher education consortia, and we're not the only ones. We are the only one of our kind in Oklahoma, in that we have 9 colleges and universities, and then we've got these business partners and civic and philanthropic groups. So that makes us kind of unique. But there's higher ed consortia all over the US. But that consortium framework sort of flies in the face of the traditional higher ed dynamic, which is like, in competition rather than being competitive and all institutions competing for the same students. They have recognized that working together will yield far greater results, and have also recognized that while there's plenty of things that we can compete about, there's even more things that we can and should collaborate on, and will make it easier for students to experience success on their journeys.
Anytime I've ever talked to you, it seems just like innate to your being to keep students at the center of it, and kind of the experience of the student as your North Star. What does it feel like for you personally to hold that pole? And you're surrounded by a bunch of people who also care deeply for that, but you are also in a space where bureaucracy and tradition and competition, like there's some forces that like can cloud this student-centered North Star. What is that like for you? How do you navigate it in a way that doesn't feel punishing? Like, that's the longest, weirdest question, but I bet you tracked on it okay. Did you?
I did. And it really made me think about how grateful that I am for my roots and my foundation as a teacher. So I mentioned that I taught fourth grade, amazing experience. I also taught kindergarten, and I learned so much from being a kindergarten teacher. And I always would joke, but not really joke, that it's like teaching unfiltered humanity. Like, you see every emotion and motivation and need that humans experience just on full display 25 times in a classroom. Kindergarten teachers are amazing. And I learned from that experience that what people need, what people want, what people desire is to feel seen, heard, and recognized. And I know that I can create a space for people to feel that way. What I can't do is, snap my fingers and change systems or policies. But what I can do is I can be present, and I can give my full attention to the person that I'm with, and I can help them feel seen, heard, and recognized. And I just hold on to that experience. When I first stepped into the role as the executive director of the consortium, I am so embarrassed to say that I didn't really tell people that I was formerly a teacher. And I had to do some self-searching, why not? I think I sort of thought, I'm moving into this higher ed role, I have to adopt this certain persona. And once I did some deep reflection, I realized because I was a kindergarten teacher, I am uniquely qualified to do this work. And because I taught fourth grade, and because I had great relationships with families, and because I did coordinated out of school time programs, I have the skills that make me really talented for this particular role. So that was a bit of a wandering answer to your question, but I hope I caught it.
Oh, I loved your answer. And there's two things I want to kind of circle back to. One is, if people could rewind 2 minutes and hear again you say that in the face of the what I can't do's, which right now that is an increasingly longer list for educators, the sort of things that are out of scope of what you can do anything about in the next 8 hours kind of thing. And then you talked about, but what I can do, and your clarity about creating spaces where people can feel seen, heard, and recognized. That is a recipe for then their natural brilliance to flow through. And so rather than you putting yourself in a position to solve all the problems, what I hear you saying is you're creating the conditions in which everyone brings their best problem solving and most open heart, so that the solutions can come from that. That's such a different weight distribution in terms of the stress of this work. And I would think could apply to anyone listening.
Yeah, I have learned a lot. I think this is where maybe some of my facilitation and higher ed experience, teaching experience comes into play, that I quickly recognized that I am an expert on a limited number of things. I mean, in terms of content expertise, I could talk all day about education and, my hobbies, but I can't talk about advanced aerial technology. And I have to create spaces where folks can have conversations that are really constructive. And I think what you said about I don't have to hold all of the expertise, but what is in my locus of control, what is in my ability area, is that I can number one, organize the space for people to come together and ask the questions that are going to surface really constructive progress, because they really do hold the expertise. And I feel so grateful to get to do the work that I do, because I am working with a ton of experts. There's like the most creative and wonderful and thoughtful individuals ever.
It's so, anyone who's not watching, if you're just listening, just go find this little spot, because the way you're lighting up talking about the brilliance and the people around you just says everything about you.
Well, thank you. That makes me, my cheeks turn red.
They can tune in to see that too.
Hi, I'm Katie Worden, producer of Oxygen for Educators. I want to spotlight our sponsor, TackyBox. TackyBox is an elementary school program that pairs innovative content with a tactile tool in daily practice to teach children to self-monitor their own words and actions and their responses to others. It's a proven tool that reduces behavior incidents by 66%. Through daily self-reflection, students build self-awareness, self-regulation, and meaningful connections. TackyBox is a light lift for teachers with a big impact on student well-being. Go to tackybox.com to learn more and become a TackyBox district.
There's another thing you brought up that I thought was so powerful about how what you learned as a teacher and how that thread can kind of get pulled through all of your different jobs and impact your ability to do it. There's a woman that we interviewed, Jeannie Stone. I don't think the episode's come out yet. I think it comes out after yours. But she is an incredible leader and was a superintendent here in the Metroplex. And when she first joined administration, she went to a teacher who was her teacher in the school where she, I think, was going to be vice principal or principal. I can't remember. And told her principal that this was happening, or told this teacher that this was happening, and to kind of, thank her and celebrate with her. And the teacher grabbed her cheeks, kind of held her cheeks and said, "Kiddo, don't ever lose your teacher eyes. Take your teacher eyes in whatever role you have from now on." And it made me think of what you're saying. Like you look at your current role through your teacher eyes, and that makes you more impactful.
Absolutely. That is powerful to hear. And I could not agree more.
Yeah.
I think it's what teachers are challenged to do in the classroom every day. I'm convinced is superhuman.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived it. I remember every day feeling this enormous challenge that you are in charge of 25 worlds.
Mm-hmm.
You're wearing a lot of hats while you're doing it. Again, teachers are superheroes. And I pull on that experience and that knowledge constantly.
So cool. Okay, let me shift us a little bit. Talk to me about the emotional, physical exhaustion in educators, and I think it's fair to say also spiritual, moral. There's a moral injury happening that I think is taking a massive toll on educators. Tell us what you're hearing about this exhaustion at the different levels, and what you make of it, what you think makes a difference. How worried are you? Like, just what's your pulse?
Mm-hmm. That is a challenge, because I certainly am feeling that and seeing that on so many levels in education systems. I'm in Oklahoma, and we have sort of a reputation for having some of the lowest funded education systems. And so when you have a system that is resource scarce, it really, in addition to already, having the lack of resources, it just more quickly zaps folks of their energy, and it kind of creates the opportunity for, um, you know, deficit thinking, and because you're not for deficit thinking, and maybe for like conspiratorial thinking, or like what I have, somebody might take that. What resource that I have, that might go away. And I see that at multiple levels. I think, first of all, like instructors and teachers, needing time and space to collaborate with their peers, but also to have time for themselves to sit, think, and ponder and plan. That is a rare occurrence for many of them, but it's so important and crucial to the innovation process for building innovative lessons and things like that. And it gets exhausting over time to not have that resource. And then I think leaders are also feeling the weight of supporting teachers who are feeling, like they are at max capacity, and having to deliver news over and over that's not great news, or that is also just really painful. I know there have been a lot of political shifts that have resulted in things that have put more pressures on schools and families and teachers. And it's hard for leaders to deliver that news and to lead a school and to know the right thing to say, because what is said one day may change drastically the next. It's exhausting to sort of navigate those waters. And so I think I personally am also still wading through this and figuring out, how do I preserve my energy in this moment? Because I can feel it just depleting so quickly, whether it's the news cycle or the recognition that, like, personally, like, I'm very worried for my international students. I have a lot of concerns, and it can be really energy zapping. But I think the place that I get, and that I've seen people get a lot of energy, is that togetherness and being in community with one another, to not complain, or not necessarily, but to like just empathize and recognize that this work can be heartbreaking. And this work also can be like the top of Mount Everest joyful. And to share in both of those things, and recognize that, it's very hard work. So that relational side is, I think, one of the most life-giving sources.
Oh, thank you for laying that out the way you did. I think there will be people who get some oxygen just from hearing you speak the truth about the challenge. So thank you for that. And I'm not at all surprised that you're seeing the relief valve in community, both because of your work and your lens on what makes a difference and what to lean toward, but also just that is the soft place to land, ideally, when we find ourselves in circumstances where individual grittiness is not a fair fight with the forces at play. So, and that's something people can kind of audit in their lives, no matter where they are, no matter how supportive or not their system is. They can really look at, what am I doing to lean into community, even if it's just another person, so I don't feel totally isolated or trapped with my own thoughts.
Yeah.
It does make a difference.
Yeah.
Another thing you spend time on is tracking on psychological safety and how that leads to innovation. And you really pay attention to that and how it either ignites when institutions are working collaboratively or get snuffed out when institutions think of themselves exclusively as competition.
Mhm.
I don't know what my question is there, but like I would love to just hear your thoughts and what you're noticing around that.
Yes. So, I mean, innovation, one of my favorite things to study is like the scientific process and like being curious about things. And
Hey nerd, hey nerd, hey.
I am such a nerd.
Listen, I see you because I am you. Go on, go on.
But I mean, in order to do that, you have to recognize that something's either a problem or it's not going right. And
Mm.
that has prompted you to engage in this process to tweak the current set of circumstances to improve them and make them better. When you're doing that in community, it can be really vulnerable because you have to be able to say this thing that maybe was really important or really special to some people, it's not the thing anymore. Maybe
Whoa.
because of the way that, innovation and the world has shifted and moved, or there's a new generation that responds differently to things. But it can be really easy when you're in isolation to lean into or lean back into doing things because it's the way that they've always been done. When you're in community, you're able to share ideas, but then also iterate on them. So maybe you have an idea for a new way of let's see. Like one example, one concrete example that I can share is FAFSA. So in the last legislative session, Oklahoma legislators made it so that the FAFSA completion is a universal requirement for high schoolers in order to graduate. Either they have to complete their FAFSA or they opt out. It was an unfunded mandate, so that put a lot of pressure on high school counselors to figure out how, one high school counselor, 500 students, how are the high school counselors going to support them in getting those 500 applications done? And so we brought together financial aid advisors and community groups to really interrogate and question and engage in inquiry about how can we make what seems impossible possible. And we were able to really ignite and engage our financial aid offices at our institutions and sort of like dispatch them and the resources that they had to help our high school counselors and high schools and our team as well, going out and making sure that counselors had what they need. And many of our local high schools are reporting that they are nearing that 100%. And so had we not had that space to recognize, like, this is a challenge that feels like we can't figure out the solution to this. How can we get creative and how can we combine our efforts and our capacity so that we can make it possible?
What that is really, really powerful because I can like picture it. And it feels like the best part of collaboration across systems where it's like think, do, iterate instead of like think, think. Like we've been at those tables too, where you're like, there's not a damn student that's benefited from the last 240 hours of us thinking.
Yes.
Which can be so frustrating. But the way you're describing it, it's like, let's get people in the room, let's think, let's try it, let's iterate. And it has led to families and high school counselors feeling supported in a really tangible way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love how you shared that because it's just helpful to hear you like repeat it back to me, because as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, like, what's really beautiful about it is sometimes it really works out. And then sometimes you learn a lot about what doesn't work. And because you're in a vulnerable, you're able to be vulnerable and say, all right, this idea that we had maybe didn't pan out the way that we thought it would. What could we do differently the next time that we facilitate this, whatever it is that we're doing, so that it is effective? And we're actually in the middle of that right now as we're nearing the end of the semester and the academic year. We're reflecting on the wins that we had and celebrating them and making sure that we're creating time to celebrate those things. But we're also thinking really critically about what didn't go so well, and sort of doing those after action reviews or I, have also called them like postmortem analysis, like after it all happened, like how did it go that way, and why, and how can we adjust it and do something different that is more effective?
And what a difference to work in a system where the postmortem is toward the end of improvement and iteration and growth and learning, and everyone feels safe enough to engage in that versus blame or shame or, undermining. There's two really different. What's your advice to people who find themselves in systems where objectively vulnerability would not be recommended, but they still want to act in service of student well-being? How do you play into this commitment to collaboration and community if there's not inherent psychological safety in your system?
Yeah. Higher education has a reputation for sort of being ivory tower. And earlier I talked about a certain persona. And I can say that, like, it is sort of the natural inclination to not want to be vulnerable, but you do have to do some relationship building. It's not like we are right out of the gate, like, all right, everybody, tell us what's keeping you up at night.
Then what did your mother do?
That's right. But that is such a challenging question. Having been in spaces where I've made assumptions that, maybe I need to adopt a certain persona or I can't be vulnerable, I've recognized, I've facilitated groups of very important people, and even the most important person wants to feel valued and wants to feel present and wants to feel heard. And I find that when I'm in spaces where maybe vulnerability is not the norm, I think asking questions and being curious and just sort of leaning in and maybe taking a beat and observing, what are the dynamics in this space? What are what are the power dynamics before, putting yourself out there to suggest vulnerability, but to really understand the people in the room, the dynamics of the room, the roles that they play. I think that's a really effective approach to starting to move into that space where people can have honest and authentic conversations, and then recognizing and making sure that people feel heard and that all voices are heard, and surfacing people that maybe haven't shared or haven't offered their perspective, giving them an opportunity to make sure that they're heard just as much as the person who's very important that's taken up a lot of the airtime. And that's when you're in a facilitator role. I suppose if you're in a room where you're a participant, I think you can still do some of those things and ask important questions that lead people to think about those dynamics. And that's the best I've got.
No, I like that, actually. I really like the kind of shaping a system from whatever seat you're in with curious questions in ways that don't kind of automatically get the cat back from people who are holding the power. That it just can sit in the room and do its work on the group. And it doesn't have to put you as the asker in a personally untenable situation. You can pick that sort of one tier up kind of question that doesn't put you in a bind, but it just helps shape the group and the culture and how comfortable people are sitting with a question, which can then change how comfortable people eventually are sitting with each other and each other's vulnerabilities. And I think that's really astute.
Yeah. I also tend to be, I always have questions. I'm always the one where when you're in the room where they're giving you instructions, I'm like, but wait, like, what do you mean by that? And before I used to, maybe like lean over to my partner because I didn't want to be the one with the question, but sometimes you got to break the seal and recognize that like probably everybody has this question. And that creates some vulnerability by just asking the question first.
Yeah. And everybody can assess for themselves, like what's the edge that would give them energy because they're kind of playing in their system in a way that feels like it's moving things forward but doesn't compromise you. And then, what's too far because you got to consider lots of the power dynamics or your own personal or psychological safety. Like everyone can assess that for themselves. But I like what you're saying because it introduces the idea that you can actively work on the systems you're in ways that feel safe to you. And that exploration can be playful and interesting and like ignite intellectual curiosity and interpersonal curiosity. And people might be really surprised, like you're saying, that you can shift a cultural dynamic in your school just by asking a question out loud when the norm is you wouldn't do that.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
It makes me think of another question I had for you, which is about educators reclaiming agency. And I would love to hear from you. Why does that matter and how can they do that?
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by agency?
Yeah, I got this actually from you, but I didn't give you enough context. I've heard you talk about just like how when educators feel like they're not given full reins to be the professionals that they are, it can kind of like suck the life out of the work for them. But when they can reclaim some agency on how they do their jobs and, how they work on behalf of students and all of that, that there's a different energy flow. And am I thinking right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think of this in like sort of a couple of different ways. So the first vantage point I'm thinking of is like as a school leader, because often it's the school leader that protects the agency that teachers are able to have by creating space for them to be curious and inquisitive and generative. And when I was in grad school, I studied this theory that I just really love. It's called the self-determination theory, and it's all about how like the fundamental elements of motivation are autonomy, competence, and relatedness, and creating conditions where teachers can make decisions about their curriculum and what they're teaching in their classroom, that they are competent to make those decisions, and that they have a community that they can consult with to check, like, is this working? Is this not working? A lot of the community stuff that we've talked about in our conversation. but so that's what I think of when you talked about teacher agency, initially from the leadership perspective, and just to like underline the powerful role that school leaders have in creating school culture,
Mm.
And again, protecting and preserving teachers' space and ability to be the best possible teachers for their students that they can be. And then, teacher agency from the teacher level. And I think of the future educators that I work with in undergraduate classes as I'm like teaching them about how to advocate for themselves, how to not just incorporate research in the practices that they're implementing and the lessons they're planning, but to also, be engaged in what others are doing, learn about creative techniques, learn about techniques that are going to increase efficiency. Because we all know, like when I was a teacher, I wished that I could multiply the hours in a day because it just didn't feel like I had enough time. And then, advocating politically even for the system to have more resources so that there's more space and more room to breathe for teachers and school leaders. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you're not saying this, but you're igniting in me this idea that anyone at the state level or district level that's trying to solve a problem by compromising autonomy, competence, or relatedness, are those the words?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Compromising any of those three is moving in the wrong direction.
That's
that
right.
Like that notion that we're going to like have everyone teaching page 38 at 10:30 a.m., almost like widget style for professionals who are trained to do this work in a much more autonomous, complex way, that's a death nail in the profession and in the outcomes that the powers that be are presumably seeking for the students. So that's me jumping on a soapbox. By the end of this, you might be putting out letters that say like, the comments of the host do not reflect the the feelings of the consortium, or I don't know.
No,
But
can I climb on the soapbox with
yes,
you?
get up here.
No, that's so spot on. I think, that's a direct compromise of autonomy and sort of that you must do this. So it's so interesting to me. I think about this a lot, that education is people work. And we know about people that they're dynamic, unpredictable, and it's so different than, a manufacturing company that's generating outputs and outcomes. And if you tweak the machine in this way, then the part that comes out will have these features on it. That is not education. It's deeply relational. It's deeply rooted in connection. And yet there is such an emphasis on outcomes and outputs. And that there's really a mismatch there. I mean, we can be mindful of things like standards and objectives and moving in the direction of those things. But if we totally forget the fact that this is people work, we've really, really missed the mark for our students, for their families. And so, yeah.
Love it. One more question, and then I want to just double check with you that there wasn't anything we wanted to cover that we've missed. But my last question is, you personally, as a dynamic leader in the education space, what guides you, especially in rough waters, and what grounds you?
What guides me and what grounds me? Well, I grew up in the city that I'm working in. All of the years of my upbringing, I went to school. I've lived in the same 5 square miles for my whole life. I actually live in the neighborhood where my elementary school is situated. I love my city, and I feel such gratitude for all of the influences on my life. That's also where I taught students, and it is so interesting. There are a lot of full circle moments where we all like it happens. My staff like jokes with me all of the time because we're often at an event, maybe like a FAFSA event or an outreach event, and somebody will approach me and say, like, we were at a, well, we have a youth housing program to support students who have experienced housing insecurity, and we provide rental assistance and get them all of the resources that they need to get connected to higher ed and be successful. And I was sort of giving the intro to the consortium, and somebody raised their hand from the back and said, "Miss Ekstad," and I was like, that's a name that I haven't heard in a long time. But it was one of my former students who had attended the information session. And that happens a lot, that like I get to see the direct impact of the work and that people are benefiting. And that drives me, that connection to our children, our families, and the reality that like my babies are now in the system that I grew up in. I have a responsibility to make sure that I'm doing all that I can to make it a good and life-giving experience for them, but not just my babies, everybody's baby. So that really energizes me and grounds me in this work and helps me wake up every day and hit the ground running.
It's perfect. Anything we failed to cover that you wanted to make sure we talked about?
I always think it's important just to circle back on, gosh, how powerful educators are. And I want to just, I have a mentor that would always refer to teaching as the parent profession, because you can't have you can't have engineers, you can't have doctors, you can't have nurses without first having a teacher. So in that way, education and teaching is the parent profession.
Wow.
And I don't ever want to lose sight of that. And I think it's so critical that we celebrate the work of teachers, we honor the work of educators and educational leaders.
We compensate.
Yes, 100%. Compensate. Here's my soapbox.
Come on. Let's go.
I'm the chair of the Tulsa Women's Commission, and I recently gave a talk on pay equity, and I put on the screen every job that a teacher does. I mean, think about it. They have to be a nurse, they have to be a social worker, they have to be a researcher, they have to be an educator. I mean, what do all of those different roles make? And then they also have to be an entertainer. And you know what? I don't know what Taylor Swift makes, but she's a pretty effective entertainer. So I think teachers should be compensated in the same way.
I love it. A mashup of all the other salaries. That's fabulous.
I think so. The things that we ask teachers to do is miraculous. Really creating something from nothing. That's like what, teaching and learning is. You don't have a skill set, and then with the influence of a teacher, now you do, because you had that guidance and direction and the expertise and the care that brought you through that new learning. And so, yeah, that's...
Okay. We're going to have our soapboxes next to each other from now till the end of time. I love it. Thank you so much, Laura. You're amazing. I'm so delighted that folks are getting to hear some of how you think and the work of the consortium, and just keep on keeping on and keep us posted on what you're doing. If you ever want to come back and tell us more, we're here.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing to support and uphold educators.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Okay, Chris, let's hear your thoughts on the fabulous Dr. Laura Latta.
I'm going to start with a really deep cerebral observation, because if I don't say it, I can't move on to anything more intelligent. So in my household, my sister and I, when we were younger, we always watched Grease 2. And so still to this day, in our middle ages, we fight over which one of us looks more like Stephanie Zanoni, aka Michelle Pfeiffer. The whole time I was watching that interview, I was like, oh, it's neither one of us. It's Dr. Latta. She looks just like Michelle Pfeiffer.
Oh my gosh, that is hilarious.
That's what I thought the whole entire interview. So she wins.
That is so funny. And sometimes she looks exactly like Taylor Swift, depending on how she does her makeup. And Emma does too, your daughter. So I think you all, the Kent Phelps and the Lattas, are just, you all favor. You could be family, it seems.
Interesting.
She'll enjoy.
Okay, so that was my deep. There was
That's
my deep
very
thought.
Deep. Very deep.
The other thing that jumped out that I just wanted to say, because when as you know, I like to read the transcript, and the words that she used to describe teachers when grouped together, I thought were just something that teachers needed to hear. So she used these 4 phrases. She called teachers icons, superhuman, powerful, and mentioned that they create something from nothing, which is part of the difficulty of the job. And I just loved those 4 things pieced together. I hope our listeners just look in the mirror and think, I'm an icon, superhuman, powerful, creating something from nothing.
Yes, such a true and right description. I love that you pulled those words. And there's something in me that bubbles up akin to rage, maybe perimenopausal rage, who knows, but rage.
Let's overshare today.
I mean, come on, you just, it's, we all get there some point. But truly, like, why do we ask that of teachers? Why is that the formula? And she mentioned educators being the parent profession, which I loved, that all professions come from experiences with great educators. So objectively, it's the most important breeding ground for future success, future generations. And we ask them to create something from nothing. And we ask them to navigate untenable political waters. And that just makes me nuts. In addition to your great point.
I would challenge you, though, to push the rage and the political side to the side, push that to the side, and think about the beauty in that's their calling, to go be that and do that. And that's one thing I feel like I've learned from this podcast. We might feel rage, but a lot of them don't. They find joy, and that's a beautiful thing. And so if we can just start celebrating that, can that move the needle in a positive way?
Yes, I think both can be true. But what would their calling and action look like with the right resources?
Of course.
What would our educational landscape look like if we actually prioritized it? So both are true. Yes.
And Laura, I think having these conversations, that's step one, helping people understand actually what teachers are doing. Because unless you're inside the school building, you don't necessarily understand, which is what I loved, her realization that she's in the perfect role because she was a 4th grade teacher and a kindergarten teacher. that's what enables her to be able to lead those conversations, create those safe spaces. But so many of us have not been in that position to see it and understand it. And so I hope that these conversations are helping people to know more.
It's the teacher's eyes. It harkens back to Jeannie Stone. Yes. And I loved her comment about kindergarten being unfiltered. Was it unfiltered humanity? Is that what kindergarten teachers are? Made me laugh so hard. Yes, unfiltered humanity. And then also the way she described the job of assistant principals, just insanely challenging and complex. Yeah, I think one of the most remarkable things about her is her many seats on the bus, her many vantage points, paired with her intense curiosity, just positions her beautifully to now be doing this queen of collaboration work, as you said. So good.
I love it. I liked in it, you just mentioned Jeannie Stone, and it's something Jeannie said too about viewing the job as creating collective buy-in along the way. And it takes having those conversations and bringing people along. And it made me, I kind of had the aha moment that, oh yeah, I guess not everyone has the aha moment at the same time. Mm-hmm. So you have to help bring people along. Mm-hmm. And she seems just gifted at doing that and creating the space. And I loved that that's what she sees her role to be, or her contribution to be. She sees that so clearly and takes that role as a facilitator so seriously. Mm.
I felt like I was in church when she was talking about the what I can't do's versus the what I can do. And to your point that she sees herself as having the capacity to be the convener and creating the safe places where people feel, what did she say, seen, heard, and recognized, and that she can do that over and over and over again. And then that fuels her, despite that the list of things she doesn't have control or influence over growing. I was very inspired by her when she talked about that.
Mm-hmm. I wondered if you were going to sing since you felt that you were in church. But...
An altar call?
An altar call.
One more verse.
Okay, I loved it because it was so clear to me that her solution to burnout mm-hmm. is community and collaboration. Like mm-hmm. those are directly tied. Mm-hmm. I don't know that anyone else has said it that way mm-hmm. in our conversations. And she sent us some notes and thoughts, and you know I like to read, so something jumped off the page at me as it related to that. She said in her writing, practical solutions. She's offering practical solutions in those conversations, but the human connection is what replenishes educators' emotional reserves, allowing them to better serve students while protecting their own well-being. And I love that thought of the point of creating those spaces and bringing people together in those conversations is to create that human connection that replenishes them. That's oxygen.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So good. And she talked about in that same vein that community is about sharing in the challenge and the joy. And I thought that was so elegant, the way she was like, it can hold both. Yeah. And mm-hmm. to your point, replenishes. And what we know beyond the shadow of a doubt is that those safe relationships, that sense of belonging, sense of community, precedes excellent performance at work, and it precedes great learning in the classroom. Now, there's exceptions, so don't come for me if you're like, I know this one person who's really good and can't connect. Fine, yes, they're out there, but by and large, to her point, when we feel seen, heard, recognized, connected, that's when we show up as our best contributors, best learners in the case of students. What else?
Love it. On that note, one point that you made that I made a note of for listeners, because it resonated with me as well, you said audit your own space. Because we all need community, a soft place to land when individual grittiness is not a fair fight with the forces at play. Like that's a solution, to audit your own space and see what are you doing to find community. And you said, even if it's only one person, because it can often start just with that one person that you find. Made me think of Karen, actually. Just, starting somewhere with that person. So I hope everybody that's listening hears that, because I can imagine if you're in a building where relationships and connection is not the norm, if you can find your person, even if it's just one. That was actually the advice that my former mother-in-law gave Emma when she was little. She said, it just takes one. Just hold out and wait for that one friend, And that was kind of her mantra all through high school. Yeah, for our listeners, we're emotional because high school graduation was this past weekend.
We're both on a ride, on an emotional ride right now, for sure. You bringing that up makes me think about the things that get in our way of creating community. And I think one is a passive stance, like community's coming for me. Why haven't they called me? Why hasn't such and such happened? Why wasn't I invited to such and such? But that can be very disempowering, where an alternative might be like, what is the life I want to create for myself? Who do I want in it? Am I extending myself in the way that I wish someone might extend themselves to me? That sort of thing can be much more of a playground and much more fun if you engage actively and you're prepared to be surprised by where you find it. We are finally at a place where we could move anywhere because both of our kids are launching and launched. And one of the things that makes it hard to think about moving, besides, of course, you and Katie, is our neighbors. We love our neighbors so much. And the idea of rebuilding that elsewhere feels daunting. And I would not have thought of myself as someone who's super linked to neighbors generally. I'm kind of a recluse, not spider, but person. So anyway, be actively pursue community and be willing to be surprised where you find it and patchwork it. You don't have to have any one person in your life that meets all your needs. If you have neighbors that meet this need and coworkers that meet this need, a partner that meets this need, friends that meet the other need, great. It doesn't matter. It can come together in 100 different ways. And seeing yourself as the architect of it versus it'll happen for me or to me is much more fun.
I also think that some of the barrier to creating community, naturally, is not understanding the importance, what it actually does. And I think I shared with you and Katie before we started recording, I met with the Center for Brain Health yesterday in Dallas and learned a lot from them. But they talk about the 3 things that create a healthy brain. And one of them was relationships and connectedness. And just to look at it from a scientific view, that's how you have a healthy brain that carries you through your life. There's a purpose 100%. Beyond just enjoyment.
Yes. It's not just cushy softness. It's a protective factor. It's the single biggest protective factor. If you look at psychology, sociology, several disciplines, the single biggest predictor of our well-being is the breadth and depth of our social relationships. It's everything at the end of the day. And if you're hearing that and going, oh my God, I don't have that, to the degree possible, don't panic and just think about little mini micro movements you can make to begin building that net around you.
One thing I thought about related to this is, we both loved John Gaskell's conversation around knowing adversity is coming and being prepared for it. And if I remember correctly, that was more like at the individual level, like doing the things to care for yourself. And I feel like Dr. Latta added a layer of yes, and do that in community as well.
Love it so much. I know I've shared this before, but I'll say it again. Nikita Valerio's quote, shouting self-care at people who really need community care is how we fail each other. It's a both and, period, end of sentence. There's no scenario where it's a fair fight if you're just engaged in self-care. The only way you're going to have a regulated nervous system is if you're engaged in self-care and community care. Again, there may be exceptions, but by and large, both are required. Lifelong biological imperative for co-regulation. I'm really preachy today. I don't know what's gotten into me. I feel like my pastor dad is coming through me, and I apologize to the listeners.
You did say you went to church. What else came up for you?
I was really taken by her focus on autonomy, competency, and relatedness, and how systems can really look at what are they doing to either perpetuate or squelch those things for all the people working in the system. That was very engaging to me.
This is a lighter comment, but one thing I noticed when she brought that up, she lit up like a sunshine when she started talking about that. And I don't know if you noticed this, but anytime she talked about an idea or a theory or something like that, like she got so just bright, which is why I introduced her as a lifelong learner, because she just, you can tell she takes so much joy in that.
Yes, she's such a nerd in the best way. She is, and her, that kind of ever curiosity combined with all the seats on the bus she's been in, and the point you made in the introduction, how very early on she got curious about how to make it less hard to do this all-consuming work. I don't know, she to me feels like an example of someone who's like, maybe this is true of everyone, but she feels like technicolor example of someone put on the planet to do something. And you can really see this sort of laddering and scaffolding of all her experiences coming to, we'll see where it goes. I think she could be at a pinnacle just with the work she's doing now. It's extraordinary. And there's a part of me that's like, and what's next for Laura? Like, she's just a bright light to me.
I liked how she talked about asking curious questions. You just used the word curiosity and it brought that to my brain. And she addressed that there's vulnerability in asking the curious question and answering the curious question. And it tied back to that meeting yesterday with Center for Brain Health, because they said, she asked the question, why do you stop asking questions as an adult? And she said, your brain is like a GPS. And so you've done it so many times, you think you know the answer. So you don't even ask the question. And her challenge in the meeting yesterday was, if you really want to be intimate with someone, connected to someone, whether it's a friend, a partner, whomever, go ask them a question that you think that you know the answer to, because your brain is they're changing every day. So ask the question again. So it kind of supercharged just asking curious questions to me, for me.
Oh, that feels so engaging. Like to walk through the world the way you just described feels so engaging.
And it feels like Laura does, which I think is why she lights up so much when she starts talking about that, because that's how she is operating, and you can sense that and see that in her.
Can I read you something that's on my wall from Lorraine Hamilton, who's an amazing coach that links to what you're talking about?
Absolutely not.
What if I know? It's just like, what if you were like, podcast over?
Yes, please do. Jokes aside.
It's today, help me set aside everything I think I know about you, everything I think I know about myself, everything I think I know about others, so I may have an open mind and a new experience.
Love it.
Isn't that lovely? Yeah. Okay, what else? Anything else, or are we ready to like shoot this into the universe for people to meet Laura?
The one thing I wrote down that she said that I just loved, which I think could be a bit of a closing comment, is she said the work can be heartbreaking or the top of Mount Everest joyful, and to share in both of those things and recognize that it's hard work, but the relational side is one of the most life-giving sources.
Perfect ending.
Drop the mic.
Drop the mic, Laura Latta. Cheers to Katie, our producer. Cheers to Laura and her work in the world. Thank you, Chris. We will see everybody next time. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Oxygen for Educators. Please like, share, and follow, and if inclined, leave us a 5-star review so that we can keep making content for you. Let us hear from you if you know someone we should interview or a topic we should cover.